So this whole idea from Castaneda's observations that intention is not something that we do, that's the ego always at work, always telling us that you can do this and you are separate from everybody else and you are this body that you're trapped in and you're all of your stuff and all of your accomplishments and all of that. To shifting and seeing intention as a field of energy in the universe from which all things emanate. So what I'd like to do here is to look at this field of energy from a perspective of answering a question, the question that has always been most difficult for me when I was a young boy. I lived out on a farm for quite a long time in Mount Clemens, Michigan, at a foster home. And we had an apple orchard out there. And I used to spend a lot of time in that orchard, lying on the ground particularly. A lot of times I'd go out there at night. The nice thing about being in an orphanage is that there are no parents. I know it's one of the difficult things, but it's also one of the great things. And one of the things that I think that as a parent myself of 8 children, I've always struggled with how much do I interfere and how much do I allow? How much do I allow my children to be what they were destined to become, what they were intended here to become? Because all you have to do is be at the birth of a child and see the miraculousness of this whole thing. And any of you parents who've had more than one child particularly know that they come in with an agenda. They show up with something. And it's always interesting to me because the ones that are sticking their tongue out at you and mad at you almost on the first day, you look at them, they throw up on you. You come home from a trip 15 years later and they're giving you the finger and, and they're still throwing up on you and they're still angry at you. And some come through and they sleep all night the first night. And some of them don't go to sleep all night for the first 2 years. And some are smiling and laughing almost when they show up. And others are sad. And it's like we know that this isn't the beginning. We know that there really are no beginnings. You get a sense of our infinite nature. And being in that apple orchard out there in Mount Clemens, I've always been very grateful that for my experience in an orphanage. Well, between the ages of 2 and 10 approximately. I almost feel as if it was a destiny. I feel like I had an invisible conversation with God. And God said to me, what is it that you want to do on this particular journey that you're taking? I said, I'd like to teach self-reliance because I know that that's all I've ever done is to teach self-reliance. Even when I was a little boy on the playground in schools and the kids would get all upset about who said what, I would call them over and say, why do you care what other people think of you? Why would you give them that kind of power over you? And if the teacher would yell at everybody trying to make them feel guilty about being the worst class they ever had, I remember telling one of my friends that if this is the worst that she's ever had, she's just had a life that's too easy. You know? And I've been doing that. I could go on and give 1,000 examples of how that has just been the thread that has wound its way through my life. I said to God that I would like to teach self-reliance on this visit. And God said, are you sure that you want to teach self-reliance? And I said, yes. He said, well then, you better get your little ass into an orphanage, you know, and spend 8 or 9 years or so and learn how to rely upon yourself. And then when you learn that and get that, you'll never be able to be dissuaded from it. No one will ever be able to take that away from you. I kind of look at all of my experiences in life that way. It's again the trolley strap example that I gave earlier. This whole idea of getting a hold of the trolley strap and then saying the words intention and then allowing yourself to be taken to the places that you were intended to go when you showed up here for this brief thing called your life, which is nothing more than just a parenthesis in eternity. It's just this tiny little spot in infinity. And you showed up here from that invisible place, and we disconnected ourselves from it. So lying out there in that apple orchard, I used to look up at the sky, and a lot of people have questions, you know, that they contemplate. One of the big questions that I used to think about a lot in my life, in my earlier life, was who am I? You know, that big question that philosophers have been asking for as long as there have been philosophers to ask is, who am I? And I think that I've pretty much resolved that. I really see myself as an infinite spiritual being disguised as a father and as a husband and as a teacher and as a writer and a tennis player, a reader and a hiker and someone who gets massages and whatever, you know, all of the endless things. It's like that's all a disguise. That who I am is a piece of the infinite, a piece of God, disguised as all of these other things. And seeing myself as a piece of the infinite is very comforting and very peaceful for me. But the other question that I think is one of the tougher ones to ask, and what I'd like to try to answer and respond to here, is where did I come from? I used to ask that question over and over and over again, and then I would really ask it a lot when I was at the birth of my children. To be there at the moment that a child comes into the world, and to know that you were one of those beings who came into the world as well. And you ask yourself the question, where did I come from? In this endless, infinite space, in this infinity of time. How did I get here? How did this happen? And why now? And why not in the 13th century? Every time I read about St. Francis and Rumi, I always think, well, I'm in the wrong century. You know, I belong back there, especially when I go back. When I went to Assisi and Cappadocia and places like that, I felt almost as if I had been there and that I was there. The answer to the question, where did I come from, is very helpful in understanding the power of intention. Because I think the new buzzword is going to be, in the next decade or so, is going to be this word intention. You're going to hear it a lot. You're going to hear it in businesses, you're going to hear it in schools, you're going to hear it in medicine, in healing, education. You're going to hear it all over the place, this concept of connecting to intention. It's the next direction. So there I was back in the 1940s as a little boy, about 6 or 7 years old, looking up at the sky and asking myself this question: how did I show up here? And in one incomprehensible moment, one drop of human protoplasm collided with another, and in that collision, a life began in what I call a microscopic dot. Just a dot. So tiny, so small, that you can't see it with the naked eye. You need a very powerful microscope to be able to examine this thing. And this, imagine for a moment as you're listening to this, imagine that this is you in this microscopic dot. The most mystifying thing about this is that in this dot that was your beginning in this physical plane, everything that you needed for this physical journey was in that dot. And every beginning dot looks like just every other dot. And not just with people, I mean, like that, there's no mistakes in that. Like, none of you turned out to be a watermelon, or a caterpillar, or an acorn, or a rhinoceros, or a wildebeest. Even though the dot looks exactly the same. I mean, it's just this tiny little, it's like there's this perfection in this thing called this future pull that pulls you toward the place that you are now. And I'm in this room now and I'm looking at you, and some of you have hair that is gray. Some of you don't have any hair at all. I can't even imagine that. But and some of you are in bodies that are 6 foot tall, and some of you in bodies that are 5'1", and some of you have eyes that are shaped like an almond, and some of you have rounder eyes, and some of your eyes are brown, and some of your eyes are blue, and things are happening to your body. Things are drooping. I don't know if you've noticed. Things are falling. I often would hold a hair up in the pillow in the morning and say, "What held it in yesterday?" You know, what? Something. What held them up yesterday? Haven't you ever asked yourself that question? You know, it's like that in this tiny little dot, that every single thing that you needed for this entire physical journey was handled for you. And it's such an alarming and mysterious thing that just that alone mystifies us. You know, how could the shape of my eye be in a microscopic dot? And my birth was in there. So that if your birth is in that little microscopic dot, it isn't inconceivable that your death is in there also. You know, or at least the death of this machine that encapsulates this ghost in the machine. So we came from this little dot. But now we study something called quantum physics. And in quantum physics, which really began with some of the work of Max Planck and Niels Bohr and Albert Einstein, we began to look at what does the dot have as its origin? If we're talking about beginnings and ends, and everything in the world of matter begins and ends, where did the dot come from? So we take this little microscopic dot that had everything in it, and we put it under a microscope looking for the source, looking for the place that it originated from. And we turn up the magnification, and the intriguing thing about this is that whether you look through the microscope down or the telescope out, it's impossible to say which has the grander view. They both go to infinity. So, but we're just looking at this moment for the answer to the question, where did I come from? And the answer that we've given is that we came from our parents' blissful union in one moment isn't sufficient. It doesn't tell us where we came from. It just tells us how the dot got here. Looking at the microscope, at the dot, we see first with a powerful molecular microscope, we see, as we focus it, we see all of these particles. And these particles are flitting all over the place. But basically what's contained in the molecule that began us is empty space. It's mostly just empty space with these particles flitting all about. So we take one of these particles that are inside of the dot, called a molecule, and we put it under now a stronger microscope so we can find out where did it come from, what is its source. And we turn up the magnification on this atomic microscope and we discover more particles, more dances with new particles with new names, electrons, protons, neutrons. Newtonian science and quantum physics have a very different look at the world. Newtonian physics tells us that the tiny building blocks of nature are these atoms, and now we take this more powerful microscope as our technology increases, and we take one of these electrons that are the building blocks of the atom, and we turn up the magnification on this electron microscope. We're just looking for the source. And we see another universe. Another infinite universe with more particles and more empty spaces. And now we have a whole new branch of science called quantum physics, which is the study of matter at the tiniest subatomic particles. And now we have new names. And now we have to learn about what's a quark. It's just a new name for a tiny little particle inside of another tiny particle. And I have a very just sort of a modest appreciation and awareness and knowledge about quantum physics. I've just scratched at the surface. I've just read some of the more popular books that explain it in layman's kinds of terms. But essentially what we have learned is that when you are looking at the subatomic level of quarks, just by virtue of the fact that you are observing a subatomic particle changes what you are observing. So the observed changes depending upon what kind of an observer there is. And if that's true at the subatomic level, that when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change, we can change what we look at by what we bring to what we look at. And if we bring hostility to what we look at, we not only will perceive hostility, but we will create it. Just by the nature of what kind of a vision we have about what we are observing. And the issue here is like, How do I look at things? Einstein asked the question, he said, the most fundamentally important question that you will ever ask yourself is this: do I live in a friendly or a hostile universe? And the way you look at the universe that you live in will determine what your life experience is going to be. Then when you change the way you look at things, literally the things you look at change. So now we take this subatomic particle called a quark, and all we're doing still is looking for our source. And we put it in what we call a particle accelerator, and we rev up the particle accelerator, and we put these subatomic particles in, and we collide them at 250,000 miles per hour. We have these subatomic explosions. And we open up the particle accelerator. Now we're finally going to find out, what does our source look like? And we open it up, and guess what's there? Nothing. There's nothing there. There's no thing there. And one of the essential lessons that you'll learn in your first elementary look at quantum physics is that particles themselves do not create more particles. Particles don't create particles. The Max Planck quote that I quoted earlier that said, "There is no matter as such," happens to be a scientifically verifiable truth, that the source of all particles is in nothingness, is in what we call the world of spirit, the world of the soul. And here's the alarming thing. If a tiny little microscopic dot contains the shape of your eye, is it possible that that dot, which originated in the formless world of energy, that in that formless world of energy, not only was the shape of your eye determined before it became a dot, but the shape of your life as well? Is that too much of a leap to make? That your life is already in an energy field from which all particles originate. Microscopic theory and what we're speaking about here, quantum physics, are saying what great metaphysicians have been saying for centuries. I mean, Jesus said it 2,000 years ago. The same thing that the quantum physicists are discovering. It's the spirit that gives life. The flesh counts for nothing. For nothing. And St. Paul, who was the author of most of the New Testament, put it this way. He said, "That which is seen hath not come from that which doth appear." Now, they talked funny in those days. Hard to figure out that language. But what he was saying there was that which you see did not originate in the things that we call appearances, in the world of form. That everything has as its origin this universal mind that we're calling intention. And it is from that universal mind of intention that every single thing in the universe originates. And that particles must first, before they can become particles, come from an energy field of nothingness. And that you, where you came from, now I didn't quite grasp all of this when I was 7 years old back in 1947 under the apple trees out in the orchard at 231 Town Hall Road in Mount Clemens. I didn't quite understand it the way I've just presented it to you here. But there was a part of me that knew that I came from something very mysterious. And if you could understand that this field that we call the world of spirit, that the poets refer to as the soul, if we could understand that world and get back to it and understand what it looks like and what it sounds like and what it feels like, and know that everything that emanates from this field, including the shape of your life, that somehow in there, in this invisible field of where I came from, there is something that was set in motion that determined all that I was to become. And all that I was to become wasn't predetermined in a microscopic dot. It was predetermined by yourself in an energy field that the dot came from. That's such an important conceptualization to get here as we move into the power of intention. All of us are really a piece of the mind of God. We are really all God's thoughts. In many ways, we're all just individualized expressions of this God consciousness. As I talked about earlier, we've taken on a set of beliefs. There are 6 of them, which constitute what it is that keeps me from understanding and living from this God thought that exists universally. It's everywhere, including in us. And if it's in us, it's also in all that we would like to attract into our lives, so that we are really connected already through this formless energy, that we are already connected to everything in the universe that we need or could ever want for ourselves. We're already connected to it. And that the whole process of the power of intention is nothing more than a realignment, so that we stop seeing ourselves as separate from and see ourselves as connected to, and getting back to that connection. And those 6 components are the components of the ego. Number 1, I am what I have. Number 2, I am what I do. I am defined by either my possessions or my accomplishments. Number 3, I am my reputation. That is, I am defined by what others think of me. So I get defined by what I get, what I do, and what others think. That's the ego at work. Has nothing to do with where we emanated from, as you'll see later. And then I am separate from everyone else. That's number 4. And I am separate from what I would like to attract into my life. That's the ego always at work. So I'm always trying to go after what's missing. And number 6, I am separate from God. God is something outside of me that I pray to and hope that it will respond to me, instead of I am a piece of God. I am always connected to my source. So now the question becomes, if I see myself as originating from an invisible source, how do I get connected back to that source? I'd like to just project that the reason that we have collective problems in the world, and the reason we have illness in the world, and the reason that we have so much trauma in the world, and depression and stress and so on, is because when we showed up here into physical particles, and then into human beings, and then we were raised by people who had separated themselves because of the training that they had had and the places that they showed up from, and their relatives, and onward it goes back, so that we are sort of enmeshed into a system in which we are raised by people who have believed those 6 components. That this is who I am, and this is what you are going to become as well. You are separate. You are what this body looks like. You are defined by the geographical region that you live in. You are defined by, the religious persuasion of your parents, and on and on and on. All of that stuff, that conditioning process that we all go through. And so we separated ourselves from what we originally showed up as, individually and collectively, and then we took on all of these things called problems. And I suggest here in the power of intention that all we want to do is figure out a way to get back to our source, to get back to source energy, and to see that everything is energy, and I'll be speaking a lot about energy here, and that energy is nothing more than vibration, and that when we take high vibrations, high energy, and bring it to the presence of low energy, it not only nullifies it, but it converts it as well. That all you have to do is bring a candle into a darkened room, and you not only nullify the darkness, but you convert the darkness to light. And that's why St. Francis said, where there is hatred, let me bring love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Let me bring higher, faster, more spiritual energies. And the fastest and the highest energy in the universe is the energy of spirit. And we want to bring it to the presence of these lower energies. So if where we came from is a field of energy, the question now becomes, how do I connect to this field? How do I connect to this field of intention? I always like to refer to the Torah, to the Old Testament. And Genesis 1:1 says, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Pretty simple. God meaning the invisible, always having existed, no beginnings, no ends, no boundaries, God. And out of this godliness came a particle called man. And then you go to Genesis 1:31, and it says, and all that God created was good. Was good. Now that's a very important conceptualization to understand. That out of godliness came goodness. So that when you use the word God, you're really using the word good. It's the same thing. God and good are the same. God is that which is good. All that God created was good. There's just one O in there. That's the difference, God and good. So that if you want to know what source energy feels like, it feels like this. I want to feel good. I intend to feel good. I want to feel good. Say it. I want to feel good. No, say it really with enthusiasm. I want to feel good. I intend to feel good. Here we go. I intend to feel good. If you call my cell phone, if you got my cell phone number, which I hope you don't, because I don't answer it hardly ever anyways. This is the message that you'll get on my cell phone. It says, hi, this is Wayne Dyer that you've reached, and I want to feel good. If your message is designed to do anything other than that, you've reached the wrong number. And I suggest that you call Dr. Phil. Because I want to feel good. Now, these 5 words are really important in terms of understanding how to connect to intention. Because here it is, folks, when you connect to the field of intention from which all things originate, when you connect to source and go back to source energy, then nothing can go wrong. Everything has to work. So that feeling good is a very important part of this process. And guess what? You can't feel anything other than good when you're connected to source. The perfect response from the ego of this is I can hear it all over the country as you listen to these words. I can hear people say, but how can I feel good? Look what's going on in the world. Look at this hostile place that we are in. Look at all the hatred. Look at all the drug abuse. Look at all the illness. Look at all the wars. Look at the problems in my life. How can I feel good when there are so many people all over the world starving to death? How can I feel good when there's so much confusion in the world? How can I feel good when so many people are depressed? How can I feel good when my children are struggling? When my mother has cancer? How can I feel good when there's robberies, when I read every day about people hurting? How can I... And on and on and on go these questions about how can I feel good? And I want to say to you in response to that you can't feel bad enough to make anybody else's life better. And you can't feel sick enough. You can't get sick enough to help one person get well on this planet. No matter how determined you are to be sick because of the sickness that exists around you, no amount of your getting sick can get one person well. And you can't get confused enough to unconfuse one person in the world. And you can't get sad enough to bring joy to one single soul on this planet. So that no amount of your defending not feeling good does anything to make yourself or anyone else feel good. I suggest to you that when you think of the word and say the words, I intend to feel good, that you substitute the word good for God. And you say, I want to feel God. I want to feel God. at any moment in my life. And that means that at any particular moment in my life, I want to remove any and all resistance that I have to being able to be in rapport with, in harmony with, source energy. I want to look at anything that stops me from doing that. And anything that stops me from doing that, I want to put a halt to, because I want to feel good. I just want to feel good. That's such a difficult concept for so many people to grasp, that it's okay to feel good. Because when you feel good, you're feeling God. And when you're feeling God, not only does it make you feel better, it's not a selfish thing, but you now have changed the energy that you vibrate to. And part of what I'll be presenting here a little bit later is the impact that you will have on others around you when you change your energy pattern so that you are in harmony with source energy. When you get back to source at any moment in your life, at any time in your life, in all of your conceptualizations, in all of your feelings, in all of your actions, when you are in harmony with source energy, you change everything around you. You change everyone around you. When you are steadfast, as I said earlier, when you're steadfast in your abstention of thoughts of harm directed toward others, you impact all living creatures. And you can change the energy of your home. You can change the energy of your workplace so that you can not only impact others in a positive way, but you can collect allies. You can just go around and begin to see this world as a friendly place rather than a hostile place. And you can see everyone that you encounter in your life as an ally, as a co-partner in attracting whatever it is that you wish to attract into your life. Because you can't do it alone. I'll give you an example. I was in a grocery store not too long ago, and I went in just to get some salmon, some smoked salmon. And I went to the department in the grocery store was where they sell fish. And I figured, probably the right place for getting some salmon, fish department. So I asked the man behind the counter if they had smoked salmon. Now this was over in Hawaii, and the fellow that was there was from another country, so he didn't quite understand what it was that I was asking for. And there was a man standing next to me, and I was feeling so good this day. And when you're feeling good, you're feeling God. It's the same as feeling God. When you're not feeling good, by the way, you're in resistance. When you're feeling sick, when you're feeling sad, when you're feeling depressed, you have left source energy. You're not with your source. You're not with God. When you're feeling good, you are connected to source energy, and the world wants to work with you. When you're around people who are feeling good and who are steadfast in their abstention of thoughts of harm ever directed toward anyone else, see the world as a beautiful place, as a kind place, as a friendly place, as a creative place. When you're around people like this, you want to do as much as you can for them. So the man next to me obviously heard what I said and went to another department in the store on the other side of the store and came back with a package of smoked salmon for me and handed it to me. He said, I think this is probably what you're looking for. He didn't tell me where it was and say, go get it, which would have been a wonderful thing to do. He decided instead that he would go and get it for me. And as he handed it to me, I said, that's really kind, thank you very much. And I was thinking, this happens all the time. It happens in small ways like this, but it happens in big ways. Like all through the writing of The Power of Intention, I would get up from a writing session, and I would maybe be stuck for just a few minutes about something, and my eyes would gaze over on the bookshelves where I was writing to a book that's been there for 20 years. And I'd just look over there, and I'd look at it, and I'd take it out, and I'd sit down just outside on the patio or whatever, and I'd just look at it, and I'd open it up in exactly the right page, the right book, and it's been there for 20 years. And it's the first time I've ever looked at it. Somebody sent it to me 20 years ago. And it's like, the world becomes a place that starts working with you when you feel good. The telephone rings and the right message that you wanted, and it's the same thing this is really a hard one for people to get, but it's the same thing is true with money. Money is it's just an energy. It's just pieces of paper that represent energy showing up into your life. And when you are feeling good, when you are feeling God, abundance flows into your life. If you're in a state of gratitude and believe that you're in a friendly universe, I pick up money. I find money every day. Now, it's, usually pennies and nickels and dimes, but I find it every day. But I never, ever stop when I see a penny. I always stop and bend over. And I notice that the ground gets a little further away. But I always get down there and I pick up the penny and I always say the words, "Thank you, God, for this symbol of abundance that continues to flow into my life." And I put it into my pocket and I remind myself to give something to somebody else. And until I've given something to somebody else, I don't put that into a separate little container that I've kept for the last 25 years of all the symbols of abundance that have flowed into my life. And there's probably $500-$600 in coins and bills and so on that over the last 20 years have showed up into my life. But it's a symbol for me. And I never say, God, I'm tired of the pennies. I really need dollars. You never say that. I love the story of a woman who was walking along the beach with her grandson. And she's just walking along and happy. And all of a sudden this tsunami, this huge wave, comes up and hits the beach and takes her grandson and takes him out to sea. Her grandson is gone and she can't figure it out. What in the world has happened? And she gets down on her knees and she begs and she cries. She said, "Oh my God, this is the worst thing. This is the worst day of my life. This is such a tragedy. Please, God, please bring my grandson back. Oh my God, I'll never be able to live another day if you don't." And on she goes. Suddenly another wave comes through and plops the little boy right down on the beach right next to her. And she looks up and she's so happy. She's got her hand and she says, "He was wearing a hat." Do you stay in a state of gratitude or you're always looking for more, you see? So every thought that you have, every moment that you have that is one which keeps you from feeling good is a moment of resistance. It's a moment of resistance. So if you tell yourself, as you're listening to these words right now, this all sounds fine, but I have never been able to do this before. If you say, I don't think this is going to work, you're in what is called resistance. Your source is a place of well-being. And a little bit later on, I'm going to describe exactly what my impressions after writing about this for 8 months, what this source looks like. For now, I'd just like you to contemplate what it feels like. I've told you how it feels. It feels good. I want to feel good. And by the way, saying those 5 words, I intend to feel good, I want to feel good, I will feel good. I used it last night. I'm going through some difficult times in my family with one of my children, and which is normal. And I was up about 5 o'clock this morning, and I was thinking about what I wanted to do here today, but I also had these thoughts about what is going on with one of my children. And then I stopped and I started seeing that was making me feel bad. And it was also keeping me from preparing to do what I wanted to do today. I want to come here and take this microphone and feel good all day. And not just all day, but for the rest of my life. That's what I want to do. And so the thought about what was going on, I stopped. And then I stopped myself and I said, I intend to feel good. And the sickness that I was feeling in my stomach, the tightness that I was feeling, the lousy feeling, you know what that is when you're worried about somebody or something going on. And you stop yourself in the minute and say, I want to feel good. And that means I want to feel God. I want to feel God. All that God created was good. I want to feel. That's what I want to feel. It's gone. Now, I could have sat there for an hour this morning and thought about all of the things that were going on with one of my children, and not one thing would change. I couldn't feel bad enough for an hour this morning to change any. Now, if I could stand up here and say, if I felt bad for an hour, it would really help my daughter go through the struggle that she's going through, I'd be here giving you a talk on feeling bad. But it doesn't do that. It's just an inner dialogue that we have become accustomed to that really is a form of resistance to bringing about the solution that we want. The solution that we want is to feel good, and we want her to feel good as well, and all of those other people in our lives that we care about. And the way that we do it is not by feeling bad and leaving God, but returning to God and having the energy. And sure enough, I know what will happen today. I will stay feeling good, and she knows that. And when I talk to her, I will say, I want to feel good, and she'll say, I know, Dad. And I want to feel good too. And I know, I have absolute knowing that whatever it is that her path is destined to be in this struggle that she's going through at this moment is in perfect order, because she came from a field of energy that is called a field of well-being. It's well-being. And we only get into places in our lives of non-well-being when we leave source energy. Earlier, I spoke about the trolley and the trolley strap. That's a streetcar. And I was thinking about this morning when I was meditating and getting ready to make this presentation today, that it's really a streetcar named the fulfillment of desire. I should thank Tennessee Williams, perhaps. But it's a streetcar, a trolley, named the fulfillment of desire. Whatever your desire, the streetcar, the trolley, will carry you to it. When you get a hold of the trolley strap and see yourself as connected to it, that's your free will at work. Your free will isn't about whether you're going to make something happen, you're going to heal yourself, whether you're going to have this money show up, whether the job is going to, whether the right person is going to show up. That's all of the stuff that you've been conditioned through the ego to believe. Your free will is not about that. Your free will is about whether I choose to reconnect to source or not, and allow this trolley to take me exactly where I was divined to be and divined to go. And anytime I'm not feeling good, or in a place of feeling good, feeling God, it's because I've taken my hand off of the trolley strap. And the fulfillment of desire then becomes out of rapport with that which fulfills all desires, which is source energy. And this is what it sounds like. So I've told you how it feels. It feels good. It sounds like this. This is Krishna speaking to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, the Song of the Lord. As Arjuna is about to go into battle, his charioteer is God speaking to this warrior. And this is what God says to Arjuna. I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Everything emanates from me. I hope that I have made that clear enough here in this brief presentation, that everything emanates from this source, including the shape of your eye, the dot that began you, but that dot isn't your beginning. It's just a little tiny place on this journey that began in the infinity of the source. And reconnecting to it is the most powerful thing that you can do to understand intention. And when you do, when you reconnect to it and get yourself there on a permanent basis, nothing can go wrong. Anything that you place your attention on. If God can do it, you can do it, because you are a piece of God. Before the 16th century, all of the ships in the world were made out of wood. Why do you suppose they made ships out of wood up until the 16th century, when iron was available? Because wood floats. And so our assumption was, to understand the law of flotation, that you make things that you want to float out of objects that float, right? Now, since about the 16th century, very few ships are made out of wood. And all the ships are made out of iron and steel and things that don't float. So you have to ask yourself, what's this law of flotation? and a series of lectures that were given back in the beginning of the 20th century by Thomas Troward, who I feel a very strong kinship to, and also feel that I was at those lectures in some mysterious way that I can't exactly define. But they were called the Edinburgh Lectures on Mental Science and the Dorey Lectures. And in those series of lectures that I have read hundreds of times in my life and reread before I wrote The Power of Intention on mental science, he suggests the law of flotation, he said, was not discovered by the contemplation of the sinking of things. It's a very important line to remember. The law of flotation, which has nothing to do with what objects are made out of, but in fact is all about displacement. That if you displace more water than the object going into the water, then it will sink. If you displace less water, it will float. So that the law of flotation was not discovered by anybody contemplating the sinking of things. Now, to understand what that means, I would suggest maybe we add to that and say that the law of healing will not be discovered by the contemplation of the sickness of things. We are about to celebrate 100 years of flight. Now, every time I get on one of those 747s and I look at that thing that weighs 80 tons or whatever, and I know that this thing is going to fly me across the ocean, I think they must do it with mirrors. Because how could something this huge, with hundreds of people on it, how could this thing go across the ocean in the air when it weighs so much? And I suggest that the law of flying was not discovered by the contemplation of the staying on the ground of things. And the law of happiness is not going to be discovered by the contemplation of the sadness of things. You beginning to see what I'm speaking about here? What we contemplate and how we contemplate it determines whether or not we will create for ourselves what it is that we want to have show up in our lives. And if we are contemplating the sinking of things, we will never understand the ability to have things that don't float. And we will never be able to even for a moment grasp how I can attract abundance in my life, because the law of abundance will not be discovered by the contemplation of the scarcity of things. So that if your contemplations are on what isn't working or what can't happen or what is wrong or what's missing or what's sick or whatever, if that's where your thoughts are and what you're contemplating and what you share with other people and how you express yourself to others, if that's what you go through your life doing, this is resistance manifested in a very powerful way to keep you from source energy. Now, source energy has nothing to do with shortages. It doesn't even know how to relate to shortages. Source energy has nothing to do with it's impossible. Source energy has everything to do with creation, and all things are possible with God. All things are possible. That leaves nothing out. But if you're contemplating that which is not possible, or if this is where your thoughts are and where your energy is, so out of those lectures, I took this observation and wrote it myself. Basically, this is what Troward was saying in that lecture on mental science. I think it was delivered in 1907 or 1908. We know that by the very nature of the creative process, which we're speaking about here when we speak about intention, we are one with the originating spirit. We came from this spirit, this originating source that I just described, and we are one with all of its principles. That source from which we all originated, whatever it is, we are. We are one with it and all of its principles. Consequently, we are one with its infinite personality. And therefore, our contemplation of it and all of its principles as the power which we want gives us the ability to use that power. Just our contemplation of this power and its principles, which you'll know when you finish this program. The way to use this process is to contemplate ourselves as surrounded by the conditions which we intend to produce. To contemplate ourselves as surrounded by the conditions which we wish to produce. And I suggest in here, in the power of intention, that the way to establish a relationship with this spirit, the way to establish a relationship with it, is to practice contemplating yourself as surrounded by it. Now, I have a daughter, her name is Sky, and many of you have seen her on public television with me. And in fact, she's on the PBS show that has the same title as this, called The Power of Intention. And she came to me, she's now 22 years old. She was in her junior year at the University of Miami, about a year ago. And she came to me one day and she said, "Dad, would you object if I dropped out of school?" Now, it's very difficult when you've been the kind of person I've been my entire life and have told my children that I really have never paid much attention to what anybody has ever told me I should do with my life. And I happen to raise children who are just like that. And I don't mean that in a discourteous kind of way, but I remember one of my daughters when I asked her if I could see her report card in the 10th grade. I said, "I haven't seen your report card at all." She said, "Those are my grades." I said, "I know, but I'm your father." You know, I thought maybe, why would I want to be showing you my grades? They have nothing to do with you. And she was doing fine. She was doing well in school. And she said, "If I really wanted you to see them, I would have already offered them to you." And she wasn't saying it in a disrespectful way at all. She was suggesting that she had a mind of her own. She was studying. She was going through. And that's how I raised my children. And I'm not saying that in a way to indicate that my children are disrespectful in any way. They're wonderful children, all of whom I'm very proud of. But they do have minds of their own, and they've been raised to think for themselves and to be independent and to get on their own path. And for me to stay out of their life as much as I possibly can in terms of interfering with what it is that they signed up for and what they showed up for, that they have within them the innate capacity and the ability to make those decisions. And I've always known that because I've always known it about myself. I love that Khalil Gibran and the Prophet, "Your children are not your children. They are the products of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not for you. They come through you, but not for you." And so Sky said, "Would you mind if I dropped out of school?" I said, "Well, why would you want to drop out?" Now, it's very difficult for me to tell her to stay in school because that's what I did, particularly when she has been to many of my lectures and read my books and knows that I believe very strongly that a person has to make their own decisions, particularly when they're 21 years of age. And I said, "Why would you want to leave?" And she said, "Well, I want to sing. I've always known that I want to sing." And this is a child who's always wanted to sing. From the time that she showed up here on this planet, she would sing from 2 or 3 years old, and it didn't make any difference. And she had no fear of it whatsoever in front of audiences or at gatherings or even at the mall or whatever. If someone would say, "Oh, you're the one who sings," she would just sing and perform. It's what she's here for, and she knows that. I teach my children to do something called thinking from the end, which I'm speaking about here. Contemplate yourself as surrounded by the conditions which you intend to produce, and think from the end. And I was telling her the story one time of how I used to watch The Tonight Show when I was 12 years old, and I used to practice what I would say when Steve Allen would be asking questions of his guests. And I used to practice, and I'd tell my mother, when my mother got us back together when I was 10 years old and got our whole family together, and I'd tell my brothers, when I'm on The Tonight Show and they asked me a question, I would answer it this way instead of that way, and they always said, "Oh, you're such a dreamer." But I always knew. I just had, it's called thinking from the end. And it wasn't like I was planning to grow up and be on The Tonight Show. I just had a knowing internally, and I would watch it every night. I would watch it till 1 o'clock in the morning. And I'd turn the TV off and a little black and white Admiral television that we had, and I'd go upstairs and I'd tell them about what was on it and so on. And sure enough, I don't know how many years later, 1976, from about 1950, 25 years later, I do The Tonight Show the first time out of 37 appearances, and the first guest on The Tonight Show was Steve Allen. And it was almost as if I knew it. And I was on the telephone talking to my wife back in New York and telling her that Steve Allen was going to be on the show. She said, "Nah, really? He's going to be? You've talked about being with him." And he was on the phone next to me on a bank of payphones. And I took the headset and I stuck it over and so that my wife could hear Steve Allen talking to his wife, Jane Meadows. And I said, "That's him. That's Steve Allen. And I'm going to be on." And I did the whole number with her. Steve Allen looked at me like I was insane. But it's called Thinking from the End. And Sky has told me that, she said, I have already practiced my Grammy winning speech. What I'm going to say when I get a Grammy. She said, I've already practiced it and I've gone through it. And she doesn't do it in a bragging kind of, she's already practicing, contemplating herself as surrounded by the conditions which she intends to promote or to create for herself. And when you start thinking from the end and seeing it and acting as if, it's one of those 10 secrets for success and inner peace that I wrote about, that you act as if what you would like to create is already here in the universe. It's a part of this business of understanding the nature of connecting to intention is to contemplate yourself as surrounded by the conditions. And I said, honey, if you want to drop out of school, I think that that's what you should do. But why? She said, I just can't sit in a classroom any longer and have people who are not singing telling me how to sing. She said, it just doesn't seem right anymore. And she said, I have such an itch in me to get out there and to do it. And I know it's risky, and I said, and she said, I also can't write one more paper on music theory and to spend my time doing that. It just doesn't make any sense to me when all I want to do is sing. I said, well, you've been singing for your whole life. And I said, if you want to do it on a career basis and all of that, then I think you have to listen to that inner voice and contemplate yourself as surrounded by the conditions which you intend to produce. It's a very important line. I use it a lot in my life. I encourage you to use it a lot in life. I contemplate myself surrounded by the conditions which I intend to produce. I'm already surrounded by it. Keep that very powerful idea in mind. So, creating the life that you want, or attracting the right person into your life, or intending anything into your life, begins with the contemplation of yourself as surrounded by all of the conditions which you intend to produce, and knowing that you are at one with this originating source and every principle that it is, which will be described a little bit later in this program. Right now, what I'd like to talk briefly about is the obstacles that we create in our own life that keep us from connecting to intention, that keep us from contemplating ourselves. All of these things that I'm calling resistance. Resistance to allowing. Think of universal source as this infinite source of energy that you want to summon its powers, and you have summoning power. You have the ability to call this energy into your life. The question is, how much of this originating spirit that is infinite, that is endlessly abundant, that is receptive to all, that has no limits of any kind, that is based purely on love and kindness and beauty and creativity. Those are the faces of intention. You have unlimited ability to attract it into your life. How much of this source energy are you attracting? And how corroded is the link that you have between yourself and this source energy? Now, you have to be connected to it because everything in the universe of the material world is connected by this connecting link. That's not the issue. The issue is how corroded, how dirty. What are the numbing effects that have been brought about by your not summoning this power? And you, anyone listening to this, can summon 100% of that power on a daily basis at any time that they want. And everything is possible for those who do it. Everything is possible. With God, all things are possible. So what are the obstacles? Here's one of my very favorite observations from one of my very favorite people. His name was William Blake. And Blake lived back at the time of the American Revolution and the French Revolution in England. And he wrote something called The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. And this is an observation from that. Does a firm persuasion that a thing is so make it so? And the prophet replied, all poets believe that it does. And in ages of imagination, this firm persuasion removed mountains. but many are not capable of a firm persuasion of anything. And what is a firm persuasion of anything? A firm persuasion is an absolute knowing that I can summon as much of this universal source of energy from which all things originate and all things emanate, including me, and all that I would like to attract into my life, I can summon as much of it as I want to at any time by choosing to feel good. So there are three major obstacles that keep us from grasping the summoning power that we have to the source of intention. The first of these is what I call our self-talk. Our self-talk. How do we talk to ourselves?